Hi, this is James, and I'd like to welcome you to the first part of my newest video series. This video series was inspired by one of my regular viewers. Her name is Carolyn. So Carolyn, if you're watching this video, hello, and this one is for you. Carolyn was nice enough to recently send me an email, and in the email she had commented that she had seen my Lenormand video series where I talk about the meanings that I have for each of the cards. And she asked me if I would be willing to do a similar video series, only this time would I be willing to use Kipper cards for it. And she even went one step further. She asked me if I would work with a particular deck, and so the deck that she wants me to use for this series is the Fin de Siècle Kipper cards. They are by Ciro Marchetti. There's a mass market version now published through US Game Systems, but the deck that I'm going to be using is my own personal monogram copy when Ciro first released the deck as a self-published edition. And so I mentioned that Lenormand video series, and I'm bringing it up again because this video series is going to be set up in a similar format. Rather than making one large video where I talk about the entire deck all at one time, I'm going to break this up into segments, so each segment will focus on 6 cards at a time. So this video will be talking about the first 6 cards that make up the deck. So now that I've talked about the inspiration for the video series, I've talked about the deck that we're going to be using, and I talked about the format, let's get to the table and take a closer look at the first 6 cards that make up the Kipper deck system. And here we are with the first card in the deck, which is Main Male. And Main Male is a significator card, and as such it always represents the male seeker or querent, and that is the person who's having the reading done. So if a male is having a reading done, this would be his card. If a woman is having a reading done, then Main Male would indicate a man who is significant to the situation that she is looking at through the reading. And it can also represent an important man to a woman. So this could be typically representative of the woman's partner or spouse. So again, Main Male is a significator card, and it always represents a man significant to the situation. So now let's take a look at his posture, because Kipper is very heavily reliant on direction. So if you notice, he is facing us. He's looking directly at us. So if you are a traditional reader and you read the cards on the left to represent the past and cards on the right to represent the future, you can go ahead and do that. I prefer to take into account the way his body is facing. So in the image, his body is facing to the left. So when I use this card or have it represent me, I tend to look at any cards on the left to be the future and the cards on the right to be the past, because his back is to those cards. So again, that's just a matter of personal preference. So again, this is Main Male, and Main Male usually represents a man significant to the situation. If it's a male seeker, it would represent him. A female seeker, it would represent a man who's important to her. So now let's move on to the second card in the deck. And here we are with card 2 in the deck, which is Main Female. And just like Main Male, Main Female is a significator card. And it will always represent the female seeker or querent. And that again is the person who's having the reading done. If a man is having a reading done, Main Female will represent a woman who is significant to the situation being looked at through the cards. And Main Female can also represent an important woman to a man. And just like Main Male can represent a partner or spouse, so can Main Female. And so now let's take a moment to consider her posture. Again, remember that Kipper is reliant on direction. And so she is looking at us just like Main Male was looking at us. And so if you tend to be a traditional reader and you read the cards on the left to be the past and cards on the right to be the future, you can keep that in mind for this card. And I tend to read the same way with this card because her back is to the left, so any cards that would be to that side of the line or the reading would be her past, and she's facing the right, so any cards to the right would be the future for me. But again, that is personal preference. So again, Main Female will always represent the woman who is having the reading done, the seeker or the querent. And if a man is having the reading done, then she will represent a woman who is significant to the situation. And so now let's take a look at the third card in the deck. And here we are with card 3 in the deck, and card 3 is marriage. So marriage can represent an actual marriage, because in traditional Kipper cartomancy, this card is known as state of marriage. So it can always be talking about the actual state of a marriage. If it's not about an actual marriage, some of the other meanings I have for this card are a serious commitment, an agreement, or a contract. If you read Lenormand, then you could liken this card to the ring in that system. Marriage can always represent a couple. So that could just be people in a committed relationship or an actual married couple. And it could also represent partners. And that would be partners in any kind of partnership. And then one of the other final meanings that I have for this card is a wedding. If it's not an actual marriage, it may be a wedding event, and surrounding cards would validate that. Now, one of the fun things that I like to do with this card, going back to the idea that it talks about the state of a marriage or a committed relationship, is that you could shuffle this card back into the deck if it was in your first reading, put it back into the deck, shuffle the cards, turn the deck over, and go through the cards, and you want to stop when you come to the marriage card. You want to pull the card that came before it and the card that comes after it. Right? So then you'll have 3 cards with marriage in the middle. And then the card on each side of marriage will represent each partner in the relationship. So it could be describing them as partners. It could be describing their contribution to the state of the relationship or the marriage. So I'm just throwing that out there for something that you may want to try at some point. So again, wrapping up the marriage card, marriage represents marriage or the state of a marriage. If it's not about marriage, then it represents a committed relationship, an agreement, or a contract. And so now let's move on to card 4 in the deck. And now we're at the 4th card in the deck, and the 4th card is Courtship. And for me, my first go-to keywords or associations with this card are dating, courtship, and the idea of wooing, being wooed. This card is in sharp contrast to marriage, the card that came before it, and this is what makes them different. Marriage talked about a committed relationship or partnership, and courtship is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like when people are first dating or first getting to know each other, that kind of thing. The relationship that is talking about is not necessarily one that is serious or is a long-term kind of thing. So with that in mind, some of my other associations for this card are meetings, appointments, get-togethers, anything having to do with being social or some kind of social activity. And just like I compared marriage to ring in the Lenormand, if you read Lenormand, you might want to think of this card as like being the garden card. And it just so happens it looks like in the image on the card that the man and the woman are actually sitting outside in a garden. Some other associations I have for this card, keeping with the social aspect of it and social activity, I have things like networking, meet and greets, introductions, contacts, and again, social events. And so you could do the same thing that I talked about in terms of a technique that I talked about with marriage. You could do that the same thing here with courtship. You could pick up the cards and put them all back in the deck, shuffle the cards, and go through them, turn the deck over and go through them, and pick out the card that comes before courtship and the card that comes after it. So just like marriage, you would have 3 cards with courtship in the middle, and then the cards on each side of courtship could describe one party in that relationship and what they are possibly bringing in terms of a contribution to that relationship. So again, courtship is kind of like the lighter side of marriage, so it can represent dating, courtship, being wooed, usually any kind of introduction or meeting or some kind of social activity, social event, or some kind of get-together. And so now that we've talked about the 4th card, let's turn our attention to card 5 in the deck. And here we are with card 5 in the deck, and the 5th card is Mature Man. This is the first person card other than main male and main female to appear. And so now remember, main male and main female will always represent the subject of the reading. It will always represent the significator. It would always represent the seeker of the reading, whether it's a man or a woman. So in relation to that, mature man will always represent somebody who is older than main male or main female. So with that in mind, some possibilities are mature man can represent somebody's father, grandfather, uncle, older brother or cousin, someone who's a senior or an elder. And if the context is not about a personal relationship or a familial relationship, then mature man can represent a male authority figure. So now playing on the idea of mature, here we have somebody who's older, like I've mentioned already. Somebody who's wiser, so I tend to think of older and wiser. Somebody who has a great deal of maturity. And when I think of maturity, I think of experience as in life experience. So this could be somebody who's experienced. Now, in traditional Kipper cartomancy, this card is known as the Good Lord or the Good Gentleman. So playing on the good aspect of it, mature man can represent somebody who is a benefactor, somebody who is helpful to main male or main female. And that's also reinforced when mature man is actually close in the line or the reading to the significator cards. So the closer this card is to main male or main female, the more helpful this person is. The further away in a line or a reading, the less helpful. And the less helpful aspect is reinforced if mature man happens to be next to a card called False Person, which we'll talk more about in the next installment of this series. Now, playing on the imagery in the card, we have mature man sitting in what looks to be a library with lots of books on the shelves. So with that, I tend to look at this as a person who is well read and educated, somebody who has a great deal of knowledge. And playing with the experience part, that could just be knowledge learned through life experience. Now, there's also a globe next to mature man. So with that in mind, I tend to look at this as a person who could be well-traveled or somebody who is worldly. And again, that would be about having a great deal of life experience because a person has seen the world. Now, coming back to some relationship aspects of this card can represent a partner to a gay man. I know some readers who ascribe mature man that position. I tend to go with that if I know that the person, main male, actually happens to be into older men. Then I will use mature man to represent his partner or his love interest. I have heard this, I have not used this in personal readings, but I have heard that this card can represent the husband in a question that has to do with whether one is being faithful or having an affair, that kind of thing. This card would represent the husband in that situation. So the last thing I want to talk about with mature man is the direction, right? Because as a person card, this would be one of the cards to keep in mind when we're talking about direction. Remember, Kipper is heavily reliant and focused on direction. So just like main male and main female, mature man is actually looking at us. He's facing us. So if you happen to read, again, traditionally, cards on the left being the past and cards on the right being the future, you still could go ahead and do that. Just like main male for me, mature man is a card where I tend to look at the way his body is facing. So his body is facing to the left for me. So cards that fall on the left would represent the future, and then the cards that are on the right would represent the past because his back is to those cards. But again, that is personal preference. So wrapping up mature man, he will represent somebody who is older than main male or main female. And so now that will bring us to the last card in this segment of the series, and that is mature female. And here we are with card 6 in the deck, and this will be the last card we talk about in this installment of the video series. And card 6 is mature female. She is the counterpart to mature man, the card we talked about before. And just like I said with mature man, mature female is a person who, in relation to main male and main female, will be someone older. And so some associations for mature female will be a mother, a grandmother, an aunt, an older sibling or cousin, a senior or elder. And just like mature man, if she doesn't represent a close relationship or a familial relationship, then she can represent a female authority figure. And again, just like mature man, the word mature would imply she's older, wiser, has a great deal of maturity, and again, maturity being life experience, so she's somebody who's experienced. And in traditional Kipper cartomancy, she is known as the good lady, so playing on that. She can also be a benefactor, someone who's good and helpful to main male or main female. And just like mature man, the closer she is to the significator cards, main male and main female, the more helpful she is. The further away, the less helpful. And again, just like mature man, if she falls next to false person, she will not be as helpful. Now, some other associations I have for her. Just like mature man can be the partner to a gay man in that kind of relationship, mature female can represent the partner to a lesbian. And just like I talked about with mature man being the husband in a question having to do with someone being faithful or not, or having an affair, in that context, mature female can represent the other woman. Right? And in that context, if you read Lenormand, it makes me think of snake, because in that context, snake can also represent the other woman. Now, just like we've talked about with the other 3 people cards in this segment, mature female, you also want to keep direction in mind with her. So if you read traditionally with cards to the left being the past and cards to the right being the future, you still could do that, because just like all the other previous people cards we've discussed up till now, she is also facing us. She's looking directly at us. But just like her counterpart, mature man, I take into account to me that she's leaning a little bit more to the left. She's not actually facing left, she's leaning to the left. So I tend to look at cards on her left side being the future and cards on her right side being the past. But again, that is personal preference. So wrapping up, mature female will always represent someone who is older than main male and main female. And there you have it. We've walked through the first 6 cards in the Kipper deck system, and that will bring this video segment to a close. So as I close, I'm James Himm Mitchell, and I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this video, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in the next video, where we'll walk through cards 7 through 12. So until then, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and take care.